Pope Gregory X, born Theobald of Visconti, was pope from 1 September 1271 to his death in 1276 and was a member of the secular Franciscan order. He was elected at the conclusion of a papal election that ran from 1268 to 1271, the longest papal election in the history of the Roman Catholic Church. He convened the Second Council of Lyons and also made new regulations in regards to papal conclaves. Though briefly annulled by Pope Adrian V and Pope John XXI, these regulations remained in force until the 20th century, when they were altered by Pope Paul VI. Pope Clement XI beatified him in 1713 after the confirmation of his cultus. Early life. Theobald of Visconti was born in Piacenza around 1210, the son of Uberto Visconti, whose brother Ottone was the Archbishop of Milan. It is said that he began his career by attaching himself to the household of the Cistercian Cardinal Giacomo de' Pecorari, Bishop of Palestrina, who was also from Piacenza. Theobald became the cardinal's oeconomus or majordomo, and was therefore in constant attendance. The cardinal was legate of Pope Gregory IX in Tuscany in 1235, in Lombardy in 1236 to 1237, and in Provence, France and Germany in 1239 to 1241. It was probably during the assignment in Provence that Theobald became known to important French clergy and laity. He was already canon of the Basilica of S. Antonino in Piacenza when he returned to Piacenza on business of the cardinal in 1239. He then returned to the cardinal, whose new assignment in France was actually to preach a crusade against Frederick II Augustus, the Hohenstaufen emperor, who was again at war with Pope Gregory IX. Early in 1239, the Pope had again excommunicated the emperor. Each had demanded an ecumenical council to settle their differences. The Pope was willing, but he planned that the council would meet under his auspices and in his territory. He would also bring to Rome all of the enemies of Frederick Hohenstaufen. Cardinal Oddo de Monferrato was sent to England. Cardinal Giacomo de' Pecorari, who was a thorough enemy of Frederick, who had gobbled up all of Lombardy, was given the assignment of rallying France and seeing to it that as many bishops as possible, as well as leaders of French monasticism, reached Rome by Easter of 1241. It was at this point, in 1240, Theobald also became a canon of the Cathedral of Lyons. At the request of the canons made to Cardinal Giacomo de' Pecorari when a vacancy in their number occurred. But getting to Rome was the problem for those who would attend the council. Frederick held Lombardy and Tuscany, and therefore land travel was impossible for his enemies. The kings of Bohemia and of Hungary refused to allow their clergy to make the journey. Travel by sea from France and northwest Europe was a special difficulty. Of necessity, this involved the ports of Nice and Genoa, which quickly became overcrowded. The two cardinals and the papal legate for northern Italy, Gregorio de Romanis, made it to Genoa, and despite dire warnings from the Genoese captains and government, they insisted on setting sail. Frederick's fleet met them on 3 May 1241, just off the tiny island of Giglio, where a fierce battle ensued. Frederick captured Cardinal Oddo of S. Nicolai in Carcere and Cardinal Giacomo de' Pecorari, the archbishops of Rouen, Bordeaux, and Auxerre, the bishops of Nîmes, Carcassonne, Agde, Pavia, Asti, and Tortona, the abbots of Cluny, Cîteaux, Clairvaux, Pietas Dei and Fiscinensis, and Gregory de Romanis, the papal legate to Lombardy. They were sent to Naples and other cities in the south for imprisonment. Pope Gregory's ecumenical council never took place, and he died on the 22nd of August 1241. Most of Frederick's prisoners were released fairly quickly, in what was portrayed as an act of generosity. Even Cardinal Oddo of S. Nicolai was able to appear in Rome, on parole, in time for the election of 1241. Giacomo de' Pecorari, however, remained the emperor's captive until May of 1243. He died on 25 June 1244. Theobald of Visconti was ill when the fleet sailed, and he remained behind in France, thereby providentially avoiding a sea battle, capture, and imprisonment. The search for a successor to Gregory IX took more than 2 months. And then, the new pope, Celestine IV, who was old and ill, survived his election by only 17 days. He died on November 10, 1241. The Second Electoral Assembly of 1241, it was not yet a conclave, did not take place for some time. However, the cardinals who were in Rome at the Pope's death, having endured considerable mistreatment during the vacancy of August 22 to October 25, which they did not want to endure again, scattered immediately. Only a half-dozen of the 12 cardinals remained in the city. Cardinals Giacomo de Pecri and Otto of S. Nicolai remained in the custody of Frederick II, though even he, disgusted at the procrastination, decided that a new pope was necessary and, in May 1243, released his 2 electoral prisoners. Even before Cardinal Giacomo had been released, though, Theobald hastened to Rome, and made every effort to procure the release of the cardinals held by the emperor. Trying to get all the cardinals together in one place proved a daunting task. It was not until June of 1243 that all the cardinals, assembled at Anagni and not in Rome, elected Cardinal Sinibald of Fieschi of Genoa as Pope Innocent IV. In 1243, when the Bishop of Piacenza died, Pope Innocent IV offered the position to Archdeacon Theobald. He declined, preferring to follow in the company of Cardinal Giacomo. Cardinal Giacomo, however, died in Rome on 25 June 1244. France. Upon the death of his patron and spiritual model, Theobald decided not to remain any longer in the Curia, though he received several invitations from cardinals. Instead he planned to travel to Paris, where for some time he would study theology. When he reached Lyons, however, he was happily and hospitably received by the Archbishop-elect Philippe, and asked to be the Dominus and Magister of the household. Of course, Theobald refused, but the Archbishop insisted, and finally Theobald gave way and accepted the position. His services made the stay of the Pope and the Curia in Lyons more comfortable. In July 1244, Pope Innocent IV was forced by Frederick II Augustus to flee from Rome. He first travelled to his native Genoa, and then headed to Lyons, where the idea of an ecumenical council took shape. Theobald helped to organize the Ecumenical Council, which met at Lyons in June and July of 1245. During this period, Visconti became acquainted with people such as Bonaventure, Thomas Aquinas, Gui Foucault, Pierre de Tarantisa and Matteo Rubio Orsini, all of whom were participants in the council. Visconti was appointed Archdeacon of Hainaut in the Diocese of Liege on 9 September 1246, perhaps as a reward for his services. He was instructed by Pope Innocent IV to preach the crusade for the recovery of the Holy Land. Such preaching had more of a financial character than one might think, since both Crusaders and papacy were desperate to raise funds. Theobald was not able to do much more than preach sacerdotally, since he still was not a priest. Theobald's time in Liege was evidently not a happy one. The bishop whom he had come to know at the Council of Lyons, Robert de Thorite, died after a brief illness on 16 October 1246. There had been a struggle for the episcopal seat when he was appointed. The provost of Utrecht, the candidate of Frederick II, had attempted to usurp the seat, and Cardinal Giacomo de Pecri, Bishop of Palestrina, had been ordered by the Pope to intervene and prohibit an election until the canons of the cathedral could meet with him. but the vacancy of the papal throne occurred after the death of Pope Gregory XI, and lasted until June 1243. In that interval the squabbling electors came to an understanding, and on October 30, 1240, Robert, the brother of the Bishop of Verdun, was chosen. Another struggle between two candidates ensued on his death, and Cardinal Robert Capocci was sent to settle the election. Since Teobaldo was a canon as well as archdeacon, he was directly involved. The successful candidate, on 10 October 1247, Henry of Guelders, was a worldly man, the brother of Otto III, Count of Guelders, and was not yet in holy orders. In fact, for the next 12 years, he was neither ordained priest nor consecrated bishop. The new bishop-elect and his archdeacon immediately had problems about Teobaldo's conduct of his office while being absent in Paris, an issue which was not settled until the end of 1250. Finally, in 1258, Henry of Guelders was consecrated. He also had himself elected abbot of the famous monastery of Stabilo. This did not mean, unfortunately, that he gave up his former dissolute military life. In 1262, he clashed with Archdeacon Teobaldo. During a chapter meeting, he was roundly criticized by Teobaldo, who accused him of compromising the virtue of Berta, daughter of Conradi de Cohen-la-Frison, by force. The bishop threatened to strike the archdeacon. Consequently, a few days later, Teobaldo was moved to leave Liege, and it is said that he undertook a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. He actually got as far as Paris, where he resumed his long-standing plan of studying theology. During this time he became a friend of King Louis IX. Visconti left Liege in 1267 for Paris at the behest of Pope Clement IV, who sent him to England to assist Cardinal Otto Bonifacieschi, who had been appointed papal legate in England in 1265, to support King Henry III in the rebellion of the barons, led by Simon de Montfort. It was during this assignment that Teobaldo became friends with Prince Edward of England, with whom he went on crusade. Cardinal Fieschi returned to Viterbo, and participated in the conclave of 1268 to 1271. Edward took the cross on 24 June 1268, followed Louis IX to Tunisia, and finally reached Acre on 9 May 1271. Papal election. Visconti was elected to succeed Pope Clement IV on September 1, 1271, after the papal chair had been vacant for 2 years and 9 months. Due to divisions among the cardinals, the College of Cardinals, meeting in Viterbo where Pope Clement IV had died, was equally divided between the French and Italian cardinals. The French wanted a pope from their own country, influenced by Charles of Anjou, the younger brother of King Louis IX of France, who had been invested with the throne of Sicily by Pope Clement IV. Charles had also successfully intrigued to have himself elected Senator of Rome, and he repeatedly intervened in the political affairs of the entire Italian peninsula. He had entered Rome on 23 May 1265, where he was made senator and was proclaimed King of Sicily. On 6 January 1266, he was crowned in St. Peter's Basilica by Cardinals Riccardo Annibaldi, Raoul de Grosbarmi, Ancha Pantaleoni, Matteo Orsini, and Goffredo da Alatri, with permission of Pope Clement IV, who did not dare to approach Rome himself due to the hostility of the Ghibelline government toward him. The deadlock was not even broken when the citizens of Viterbo locked up the cardinals in the episcopal palace where they were meeting, and finally tearing off part of the roof of the building. Finally, in August of 1271, the cardinals decided to appoint a committee, 3 of their number from each side, to negotiate a settlement. When the 6 could not agree, however, on the choice of one of the cardinals, they decided to look outside their ranks. They settled on Teobaldo Visconti, the Archdeacon of Liege. Their decision was ratified by all of the cardinals on September 1, 1271. This was a victory, in fact, for the French-leaning faction, since Theobald had intimate connections with France, and his nephew, Vicedomino de Vicemini, a native of Piacenza but Archbishop of Aix in Provence, had been a follower and advisor of Charles of Anjou ever since he came into Italy. The election of Visconti, after a 2-year and 9-month struggle, came as a complete surprise to him, since it took place while he was engaged in the Ninth Crusade at Acre in Palestine with King Edward I of England. Not wanting to abandon his mission, his first action upon hearing of his election was to send out appeals for aid to the Crusaders. At his final sermon at Acre just before setting sail for Italy, he famously remarked, quoting Psalm chapter 137, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning." Nonetheless, he had to return to Italy immediately, since he had been summoned by the cardinals in order to accept the election at their hands. On the 1st of January, the Pope-elect reached Brindisi, and he arrived in Viterbo, the site of the election, where the cardinals were waiting. In early February 1272, on some unknown date he completed the election by accepting the papacy. It was in Viterbo that he assumed the papal mantle, but he was still careful to call himself Episcopus Electus. On March 13, he entered Rome with the entire Roman Curia. Since he was not in holy orders, he had to be ordained a priest, which took place on the 19th of March. He was consecrated a bishop and crowned on the 27th of March, at St. Peter's Basilica. Diplomatic communications with Mongols. As soon as he was elected in 1271, Pope Gregory X received a letter from the Mongol Great Khan Kublai, remitted by Niccolo and Matteo Polo following their travels to his court in Mongolia. Kublai was asking for the dispatch of 100 missionaries, and some oil from the lamp of the Holy Sepulchre. The new pope could spare only 2 friars and some lamp oil. The friars turned back soon after the party left for Mongolia. The 2 Polos returned to the Mongol Empire and remitted the oil from the pope to Kublai in 1275. The Mongol Ilkhanate leader Abaka sent a delegation with over a dozen members to the 1274 Council of Lyon, where plans were made for possible military cooperation between the Mongols and the Europeans. After the council, Abaka sent another embassy led by the Georgian Vasili brothers to further notify Western leaders of military preparations. Gregory X answered that his legates would accompany the crusade, and that they would be in charge of coordinating military operations with the Ilkhan. However, these projects for a major new crusade essentially came to a halt with the death of Gregory X on the 10th of January 1276. The money which had been saved to finance the expedition was instead distributed in Italy. Pope and Council. Sometime during his reign as Pope, Gregory X wrote a letter against the charges of blood libel and persecution against the Jews. Mindful of the scandals attached to the conclave at Viterbo that had elected him, realizing that tighter controls on the entire process of election were needed, he produced the papal bull, Ubi Periculum, which was subsequently ratified by the Council of Lyons on 16 July 1274, and incorporated into the Code of Canon Law. On his arrival at Rome in 1272, his first act was to carry forward the wish of Gregory IX and summon a council. 2 days after his coronation, Gregory X sent a letter to King Henry III of England, inviting him to a general council to be held on the subject of the Holy Land, beginning on May 1, 1274. The Second Ecumenical Council met at Lyons in 1274 for the purpose of considering the East-West Schism, the condition of the Holy Land, and the abuses of the Roman Catholic Church. Council objectives. His main objective as Pope was to convene the council, and he had a program for that council: reconciliation with the Orthodox Church to end the schism between the East and West, preparation of a new crusade and donations of a tithe of all churches for it, establishment of measures to end abuses in the Church, Regulation of papal elections through the Constitution, ubi periculum maius. It should be noted that the Pope's interests were not doctrinal in nature, but disciplinary. In connection with the financing of the Crusade, Pope Gregory imposed on all clerics a 6-year-long tax of 10% of their income. This was a considerable increase in the tax rate, which, on previous occasions, had been for 3 years, at a rate of 5%. 26 permanent tax districts were established, each having a collector and a sub-collector. His constitution with respect to conclaves legislated a number of important points. That a meeting for the election of a pope should be held at a suitable place, where the pope and his curia were residing when the pope died. If they were at a villa, or a country village, or a town, they should proceed to the nearest city in the diocese. That a meeting for the election of a pope should not take place until the space of at least 10 days had intervened. That all cardinals who were absent from the conclave should have no right to cast a vote. That not only absent cardinals, but also men of every order and condition, are eligible to be created the Roman pontiff. That, at the conclusion of the Novendiales, and the Mass of the Holy Spirit sung on the 10th day, all the cardinals who are present should be enclosed in the palace where the Pope died, along with 2 or, if they are ill, 3 or 4 servants. None may enter or leave, except on account of illness. There should be no interior walls, but each cardinal's quarters should be separated from the rest by cloth drapes, and they should live in common. That the place of the conclave and its entries should be carefully guarded. That the cardinals may not leave the conclave for any reason, until a new pope has been elected. That cardinals who arrive after the enclosing of the conclave, and before the election of a new pope, have the power to enter the conclave and vote along with the others, and no cardinal can be excluded for any reason, not even if he be excommunicated. That, if a pope has not been elected in 3 days, then cardinals are permitted to have only 1 dish at their meals. That, in holding the deliberations, no one is to be put under an anathema, no one is to engage in bribery, or to make any promises, or by going around politicking to promise a cardinal anything once he has been created pope. During the conclave, the cardinals are to engage in no other business than completing the election. That no one can be elected pope without the votes of 2/3 of the cardinals present in the conclave. That, upon the death of a pope, all magistracies and offices cease and vacate their functions, except for the major penitentiary and the minor penitentiaries, and the chamberlain of the Holy Roman Church.